Feel the neon pulse of the city as we navigate the high-stakes world of modern life and digital dreams. This is where high-tech visuals meet raw, ancient emotions in a burst of cinematic light. Click subscribe now and keep your finger on the pulse.
At my son Solomon's funeral, my son-in-law stood at the podium in a charcoal gray suit and wept in front of 300 people. Solomon struggled with his demons, he said, dabbing his eyes with a folded white handkerchief. We all tried to help him. But addiction is a disease, and sometimes it takes our loved ones before we can save them. 300 heads nodded. 300 mouths murmured. My daughter Shayla sat beside me in the front pew and leaned into him when he came back to his seat. My name is Arletta Cross. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a forensic auditor at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. I reviewed financial records. I caught fraud schemes. I testified in federal court 11 times. I did not cry at my son's funeral. I sat in that pew and watched my son-in-law's face. That was February 14th, 2024. 9 months later, on November 3rd, I found what Solomon left behind for me. And everything I believed about how my son died collapsed like a building with its foundation cut. This is the story of how I brought my son home. Let me tell you who Solomon really was, because my son-in-law's version of him was not the truth. Solomon James Cross was born July 22, 1985, during a Sunday afternoon thunderstorm, my only son. He arrived 12 days late and did not cry when the nurse held him up. Just blinked, looked around, took stock. That was Solomon his entire life. Patient, deliberate, the kind of man who read every line of a contract before signing and kept every receipt in a labeled folder. He studied business administration at Morehouse College, graduated 2007, worked his way to office manager at Piedmont Orthopedic Associates, a medical group on Peachtree Road in Atlanta. He handled billing, payroll, vendor contracts, insurance reimbursements. He had been there 9 years. His boss and the practice's lead physician was Dr. Gareth Hollins, my son-in-law, married to my daughter Shayla since 2017. Gareth had hired Solomon personally. I need you to understand something before we go any further. Solomon was a recovering alcoholic. He had been sober for 8 years, 4 months, and 16 days when he died. He attended day every Tuesday and Thursday evening at Cascade United Methodist Church. He wore his 8-year sobriety medallion on a chain under his shirt. He drank sparkling water and fruit juice and black coffee, and he was deeply, quietly proud of that. On the night of February 10, 2024, my son drove his Ford Explorer onto I-285 West sometime after 11 o'clock and hit a concrete barrier at 62 miles per hour. The car did not brake before impact. He was pronounced dead at the scene at 11:47 p.m. The toxicology report showed a blood alcohol content of 0.4. There were 2 beer bottles in the back seat. The investigating officer closed the case in 5 days. Accidental death due to impaired driving. I am a forensic auditor. I know that numbers can be arranged to tell whatever story you need them to tell. I also knew that my son had not taken a drink in 8 years. But the case was closed. The police had their answer. Every person around me was telling the same story. And I was a mother standing in front of her son's closed casket. So I did what grieving mothers do when the ground falls away. I buried him. I carried the weight of it. I tried to make sense of something that made no sense at all. For 9 months, I was wrong. The storage unit was Solomon's. A 10x10 at Midtown Safe Storage on Howell Mill Road, rented since 2019. I had been putting off clearing it out. Every time I came close to making the call, I couldn't do it. Something in me wasn't ready. November 3rd was a Sunday, clear and cool, the kind of Atlanta fall afternoon that feels like an apology for the summer. I told myself I'd spend 2 hours and leave. Solomon organized his storage the way he organized everything, labeled boxes, furniture stacked along the walls, seasonal items in sealed plastic bins. I moved through it methodically, the way he would have wanted. In the back corner sat a red metal rolling toolbox, the kind mechanics use. Solomon was not a mechanic. He did not work on cars. I remember noticing that and filing it away. The top 2 drawers held standard tools, a hammer, wrenches, a level. The bottom drawer was heavier than it should have been. I pulled it all the way out and understood why. A false bottom. A thin sheet of plywood cut precisely to fit the drawer, painted to match the lining underneath. I pried it up with a flathead screwdriver. Underneath, a waterproof Pelican case with a combination lock. The combination was Solomon's birthday, 0722. He knew I would know that. Inside, a green spiral notebook, a USB drive taped to the inside lid, and a sealed envelope. On the envelope, in Solomon's careful handwriting, "For Mom. If something happens to me, read this first." I sat down on a plastic bin and did not move for a full minute. Then I opened the envelope. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to tell you in person. I am scared. I found something at work that I was not supposed to find, and when I confronted Gareth, it did not go the way I hoped. I need you to know one thing before anything else. I am sober. I have not had a drink. Whatever anyone tells you about how I died, I was clear-headed and I knew exactly what I was documenting. Check the notebook. Check the drive. I love you. I'm sorry I waited this long. Solomon." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the spiral cover. I opened the notebook. Solomon had been keeping records since September 2023. He wrote in the same even print he'd used since grade school, organized by date and category. He was his mother's son. September 12, 2023. Found $18,400 in duplicate insurance billings for Q3 procedures already billed in Q2. First assumption, software error. September 19, 2023. Not a software error. 17 duplicate submissions across 3 payers: Blue Cross, Aetna, United. All tied to procedures performed by Dr. Gareth Hollins. Total this quarter, $61,200. October 3, 2023. Pulled records going back to January 2022. Pattern is consistent. Duplicate submissions, billing for procedures not performed, upcoding. I have managed this practice's billing for 6 years. I know what legitimate claims look like. Total estimated fraud over 22 months, $340,000. I put the notebook in my lap and pressed both hands over my eyes. $340,000. My son had uncovered $340,000 in fraudulent insurance billing at his own brother-in-law's practice. I picked it back up. October 14, 2023. Confronted Gareth after the last patient. I laid everything out: spreadsheets, payer reports, billing codes. He was calm. Said it was a software issue he was already aware of and correcting. Asked for 30 days to clean it up before any reporting. He seemed embarrassed. I wanted to believe him. November and December 2023. Nothing corrected. I kept auditing quietly and kept finding more. Also found wire transfers totaling $180,000 from Gareth's personal account to a man named Pellegrino over 14 months. Irregular dates, no invoice documentation. I researched Pellegrino, former business partner from a practice Gareth ran before Piedmont. The relationship ended badly. The payments look like a debt. January 28, 2024. Confronted Gareth a second time. Gave him an ultimatum: self-report to the payers and begin restitution within 30 days or I report it myself. He raised his voice at me for the first time in 9 years. Said I was going to destroy Shayla's life. Said Pellegrino would come after Shayla if the practice went under before he got repaid. I told him I would give him until February 10th. I stopped reading. February 10th was the night Solomon died. February 9, 2024, final entry. Gareth called this afternoon. He says he's ready. He wants to meet tomorrow night at the Peachtree Garage on Marietta Street to show me the corrected records. Says he keeps some financial files in his second car, which is being serviced there. He asked them to keep it open late. He offered to drive me back after. I told him I'd drive myself. He said that's fine. I'm going. I want to believe he's going to do the right thing. I've been praying about it. Mom, if something goes wrong, please have someone look at my brake lines. I want to be wrong about this. I really do. I sat in that storage unit in November, holding my son's last words, and I could not breathe. He had walked into a meeting knowing it might be a trap because he wanted to believe Gareth could still choose differently. And Gareth had chosen murder. I am not a woman who acts before she thinks. 31 years in hospital finance taught me that panic destroys cases. So I sat in that unit for 20 minutes, and I made a very deliberate decision about what I was not going to do. I was not going to call Gareth. I was not going to call the police. Not yet. Not without knowing exactly what I had and how to use it. The first call I made was to my college roommate, Ingrid Moss. Ingrid had spent 27 years as a special agent in the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Atlanta before she retired to Decatur 3 years ago. She was the sharpest person I knew, and she owed me nothing. But she was also someone who had spent nearly 3 decades watching evidence cases collapse because they were handled wrong. She answered on the second ring. "I need you," I said. "Can you come to me right now?" She was there in 20 minutes. I handed her the notebook without speaking. She read it standing up, turning pages carefully, the way I'd seen her go through case files. No rushing, no skimming. When she finished, she looked up. "Do you have his work email access?" "He gave me the login 2 years ago. Emergency use." "Good." She set the notebook down. "Insurance fraud at this scale crosses state lines. Multiple payers, multiple states. That's wire fraud, healthcare fraud, federal jurisdiction. Before we do anything else, we download his full email archive to a secure drive and I go through it with you." She looked at me steadily. "And we do not go near Gareth until I have my contacts at the Atlanta field office briefed and ready to move. We do this right, not fast." "There's the car," I said. "The brake lines. The car is at a salvage yard somewhere." "I'll find it." She put her hand on my arm. "Arletta, he is not going to walk away from this. But you have to let me build it correctly." I understood. I also knew I needed to see Gareth's face one time before any of it began. "I know what you're thinking." Ingrid said the same thing when I told her, not without a plan. So we made one. Before Gareth ever came through my door, Ingrid installed 3 recording devices in my living room. Small, wireless, positioned at angles that would capture both faces clearly. She briefed me on exactly how the recordings would be handled as evidence. I was not walking into that conversation alone or unprepared. I told Gareth I needed to see him. Family matter. He came on November 6th at 7 in the evening, wearing a fleece and jeans. Casual, comfortable, the face of a man who believed he had already won. I placed Solomon's notebook on the coffee table between us. He looked at it. Something tightened along his jaw. "I found Solomon's storage unit," I said. "I found everything he documented." Gareth picked up the notebook, opened it, read a few lines, set it back down. "Arletta," he said, measured. "Solomon was not well toward the end. You know that. He was 8 years sober. He relapsed. It's heartbreaking, but he documented giving you until February 10th to self-report." I did not raise my voice. "He died on February 10th. He wrote to check his brake lines." Gareth was quiet. "Did you have my son's brakes tampered with?" The silence in that room lasted long enough that I heard a car pass outside on the street. Then something shifted behind his eyes. The concern dropped off his face entirely, and what was underneath it was cold and flat. "He was going to destroy the practice," he said. "My career, everything Shayla had. And Pellegrino, you don't understand what that man does to people who can't pay." Solomon didn't understand the situation he was walking into. He thought he was doing the right thing. He had no idea what the right thing actually cost. "So you killed him." I protected my family. He said it like it was reasonable, like I should follow the logic. I wanted to stand up and scream. I sat perfectly still. "Here is what you need to understand," he said then, leaning forward. "If you take that notebook anywhere, to the police, to anyone, I will tell them that Shayla knew about the billing. I've spent months preparing documentation that puts her name on decisions she never made, emails from her account, records that can be read both ways." He paused. "Your daughter will be indicted alongside me. Is that what Solomon would have wanted?" I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said quietly, "it isn't." He left 20 minutes later, satisfied that he'd won. The recording devices had captured every word. The next 12 days were not triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I cried every night. I lay awake thinking about my son on I-285 in the dark with 15 seconds of warning, thinking about 8 years of sobriety and 2 beer bottles planted in his back seat, and I could not always hold myself together. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my chest so tight I had to sit up to breathe. But in the daytime, Ingrid and I worked. We had the notebook, the USB drive, which held organized folders of billing records and transaction histories going back 22 months, and the recording from my living room. Ingrid presented the financial evidence package to her contact at the FBI Atlanta field office on November 9th. The same day, she arranged for a certified accident reconstruction expert named Dr. Ferris, a former NTSB investigator, to examine Solomon's Explorer at the salvage yard on Flat Shoals Road. The car had sat there since February. Dr. Ferris worked 3 hours. He found a clean diagonal cut on the rear brake line. Not wear, not corrosion. A cut consistent with a tool, positioned to cause a slow leak that would become complete brake failure under sustained pressure at highway speed. He told me that a driver experiencing this failure on I-285 at highway speed would have had between 15 and 30 seconds of warning before total brake loss. I have thought about those 15 seconds every day since. While Ingrid built the federal case, I watched the cameras. Before my meeting with Gareth, Ingrid had installed 4 small wireless cameras in my house at my request. I told her I wanted to see what he did when he believed he had neutralized me, so the cameras stayed active after he left. And Gareth and Shayla came to the house 2 days later when I told them I wasn't feeling well. I stayed in my bedroom. The cameras covered the living room, the kitchen, the front hall. I watched my daughter move through my house like a guest who wasn't sure of her welcome. She went to put the kettle on, and Gareth said, without looking up from his phone, "We're not staying long." She put it back without arguing. She picked up her phone to call a friend. I recognized the name on the screen, and Gareth put his hand over hers, firmly. "You can do that later." She put the phone in her pocket and said quietly, "You're right. Sorry." She apologized for trying to call her friend in her mother's house. I watched that clip 3 times. 3 times I had to remind myself to keep breathing. I had believed I was paying attention. I had believed I knew my daughter. I thought that if her marriage had become something dangerous, I would have felt it somehow known. I was wrong about that, the same way I was wrong about Solomon for 9 months. I had been consumed by grief and then by the investigation, and I had not let myself see what was right in front of me. Shayla was not Gareth's partner in any of this. She was his prisoner. I don't know exactly when it started. I don't know when care became control and control became the only air she could breathe. What I know is that my daughter had been living inside carefully managed walls for years, and I had looked at those walls and seen protection. That was over now. On November 19, 2024, the FBI executed search warrants on Piedmont Orthopedic Associates and on Gareth's personal and business accounts. Gareth was taken into custody at the practice at 10:15 in the morning. He was in the middle of seeing a patient. Ingrid called me at 9:47, 2 words, "It's done." Shayla was home when 2 agents knocked. She called me from her front steps, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. Mom, what is happening? There are agents at my door." "I know, baby. I was already in my car. I'm coming. I'm going to explain everything. You are safe. I love you." Sitting with my daughter at her kitchen table that afternoon, while she read Solomon's notebook, all of it, every entry, the last page, watching her face move through disbelief and grief and fury, and then into something quieter and more devastating, a settling into understanding, I will carry that afternoon with me for the rest of my life. When she finished, she sat with her hands folded on the table for a long time. He killed Solomon. Yes. He killed my brother, and I was making his breakfast. "Stop," I took her hands. "You did not know. He built it so you couldn't know. That is not your failure. That is his design." She cried for a long time. I held her. Through the window, the magnolia tree her grandfather had planted 30 years ago stood bare in the November yard, and I thought about Solomon, who always believed in things that outlasted him. Gareth Hollins was indicted by a federal grand jury on December 3, 2024. Charges: healthcare fraud, wire fraud, insurance fraud totaling $340,000, conspiracy. The homicide charge came separately from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, grounded in Dr. Ferris's reconstruction report and the recording from my living room, specifically Gareth's statement, "I protected my family," spoken in direct response to my question about the brake lines. Pellegrino was charged with extortion and related offenses. He cooperated with federal prosecutors and testified that Gareth had paid him $195,000 over 14 months, funded directly from the fraudulent billing proceeds. Pellegrino confirmed that Gareth had been desperate and afraid and had made the decision to kill Solomon on his own. The trial began in March 2025 and lasted 4 weeks. I testified for 2.5 days. Gareth's defense attorney called me a grief-stricken mother operating on suspicion. I told him I was a forensic auditor with 31 years of experience, that the evidence had been verified by the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and that the recording was self-explanatory. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Gareth to 37 years in federal prison on the fraud convictions. The state murder trial is scheduled for the fall. The district attorney is seeking life." When they led him out of the courtroom, Gareth turned and looked at Shayla one last time. She was sitting beside me in the gallery. She met his eyes, held them for 3 full seconds, and then she turned and looked at me instead. That was enough. Shayla moved home in January. The house on Cascade Road, the one she grew up in, where Solomon used to spread his homework across the kitchen table and eat half the cornbread before dinner was ready. She's in therapy twice a week with a counselor who specializes in coercive control. Some days are hard. Some mornings I come downstairs and she's already made coffee, and she's standing at the back window watching the yard, and she doesn't flinch when I walk in. I count that. I count it as something earned. The Solomon James Cross Foundation launched on February 10th, 2025, 1 year to the day after my son was murdered. We do 2 things. We help families navigate financial exploitation within family systems, and we fund independent billing audits for small medical practices that don't have the internal infrastructure to catch fraud before it compounds. Our first audit found $88,000 in billing irregularities at a pediatric clinic in Gwinnett County. Their office manager sat across from me and wept with relief that it had only been 3 months, that it hadn't become years. Ingrid serves on our board. Dr. Ferris gave our first community education session on proper evidence documentation for suspected criminal activity, because the lesson I want every person who hears this story to understand is that how you handle what you find matters as much as what you find. You do not go alone. You do not confront without recording. You get someone who knows the law before you make a move. That is not weakness. That is how justice actually holds. Shayla called me last Tuesday evening, just to talk. She told me about a case study in her graduate program. She told me something her professor had said, that survivors often carry guilt for not recognizing the abuse sooner, and that one of the most important things a counselor can offer is the understanding that the inability to see clearly is not a failure of the victim. It is the intended outcome of the abuse. Sounds like a good teacher, I said. She is a pause mom. Do you think Solomon knew when he put that case in the toolbox? I thought about it for a moment, about my son, careful and deliberate, choosing a lock whose combination only I would know, leaving a letter that started with "I am sober." I think Solomon knew the truth mattered more than the risk, I said, and I think he trusted me to do something with it. She said good night. I sat on the porch in the dark, Atlanta quiet around me, and I thought about my son's notebook, the neat rows of figures, the dates and amounts, the documented confrontations, the final page. He hadn't just left evidence. He had left a roadmap. He had laid it in a waterproof case in a locked toolbox because he knew his mother would search until she found it, and that once she found it, she would not stop. He was right about that. My name is Arletta Cross. I am 64 years old. My son was murdered, and his killer spent 9 months in my daughter's bed while I grieved. And then I stopped grieving and started working. Solomon James Cross, July 22, 1985 to February 10, 2024. Beloved son, patient, careful, honest to the end. He taught me what integrity costs. I intend to spend whatever years I have left proving it was worth paying.